In Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, in Chapter 22, Prithu Maharaj's meeting with the four Kumaras. Indraya Vishaya Krishtar Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat Indraya Vishaya Krishtar Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat Indraya Vishaya Krishtar Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat. Okay, please chant.
Indriya Vishaya Krishte
Indraya Vishaya Krishte
Dayata Manaha
Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat.
Indraya Vishaya Krishte
Indraya Vishaya Krishte
Akshitam Dhayatam Mana
Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana
Chetanam Harati Bhute
Chetanam Harate Bhute
Stambastoyam Vivarita
Stambastvayami Vahradat. Indraya Vishaya Krishte Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat. Indriya Vishaya Krishte Akshitam Dhyayatam Mana Chetanam Harate Bhute Stambastvayami Vahradat. Right? Word for word. Indriyayi, by the senses. Vishaya, the sense objects. Akrishtayi, being attracted. Akshiptam, agitated. Dhyayatam, always thinking of. Mana, mind. Chetanam, consciousness. Arte, becomes lost. Bude, of intelligence. Stamba, big straws. Toyam, water. Iva, like. Kridat, from the lake. Translation. Translation by Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Please repeat. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. Like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Purport. In this verse, it is nicely explained how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted, and we gradually become almost completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the previous verse, it is recommended that we should always keep in touch with the devotional service of the Lord, so that the blazing fire of devotional service can gradually burn into ashes material desires, and we can become liberated from the repetition of birth and death. This is also how we can indirectly keep our staunch faith in the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness, by continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. If one takes up the sannyas order of life, but is not able to control the mind, he will think of objects of sense gratification, namely family, society, expensive house, etc. Even though he goes to the Himalayas or the forest, his mind will continue thinking of the objects of sense gratification. In this way, gradually one's intelligence will be affected. When intelligence is affected, one loses his original taste for Krishna consciousness. The example given here is very appropriate. If a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. Similarly, when big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used by them, and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world, and thus we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires towards the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family and continually think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. Okay. All right. So this verse points out that when our mind is attracted to the sense objects for our own enjoyment, then we become agitated and we lose our original consciousness. So what is that original consciousness? So our original consciousness is Sat Chit Ananda. We are eternal, we're full of knowledge, and we're full of bliss. We're also pure devotees. That's our original consciousness. Now, for most people, we can't see that, right? We're not able to realize that we're eternal, that we're full of knowledge, and that we're full of bliss. You know, you can say, how can I be full of bliss when I see so much misery, or I'm personally going through so much misery? And that's because we're covered over by these layers of illusion. And that's because we're attracted to sense objects for our own enjoyment rather than the enjoyment of Krishna. So really you want to think about what is our meditation? You know, what is your meditation in life? For most people, their meditation is not on Krishna. Their meditation is not on God. It's, you know, something like money, or, you know, the opposite sex, or family, right? This is their meditation. And this leads to so much dissatisfaction and so much misery. So, you know, people that their meditation is money, I've seen this so many times where they're so focused on making money, they end up, losing their families. Their wife or husband becomes dissatisfied because they're not spending any time at home, or they're neglecting their duties at home, because they're spending so much time focusing on making money. There's this stereotype of fathers in the 1950s didn't really know their kids, right? Because they're at work all the time providing for the family. And then we know what happened in the 1960s, like the rate of divorce just exploded, right? And so it's because people are focused they're focusing on making money. That's their meditation, right? All day long, they're focusing on making money. And so therefore they're losing their families. Sometimes they're losing their honor, right? People do so many nefarious things to get money, right? They're cheating, they're lying, they're stealing, just to get money. I mean, so many times we see, executives of companies, all of a sudden there's a big scandal and they get put in jail because they've been stealing money from the company, right? And then not only do they lose their job, but they lose their honor, and oftentimes their family and friends too. People that their meditation is relationships, right? The opposite sex. We can see this all the time in the news, right? The news is full of scandals, right? I remember when I was in high school, there was a young man who was, he's a very popular young man, and he had these kind of high morals. He was what was called straight edge. So that meant he didn't eat any meat, he didn't have illicit sex, he didn't take intoxication, but there was no like spiritual reason for it, really. It was just more just kind of like a moral thing. And then one day he met a girl, and she was not into any of that stuff. And the next thing you know, this boy ended up, I don't think he ate meat necessarily, but maybe he did, I don't know. But I do know that he got heavily involved in intoxication, and it destroyed his life for many years. He's doing much better now. But also there was a story that I heard not too long ago. I, for some reason, have an attraction to advice columns where people, they write and they ask advice, what should I do about this? I don't know why I read that. It's complete nonsense. But but I like to see the problems that people are having. And so this one man wrote into this advice column, and he was saying he didn't know what to do because he had married his childhood sweetheart. So, it was the first girl he ever loved. It was the only person he'd ever been with. And they had been married for so many years, and they had some beautiful daughters. And his wife, her family was quite wealthy, and so they actually helped him start a business. And so he started this business, and he hired a secretary, and his secretary was young and beautiful. And now all of a sudden he's just meditating on this young, beautiful secretary, and he completely forgot that he loved his wife and he had this beautiful family. And he ended up having an affair. He ended up having an affair with the secretary, and he lost his wife, his business, his children won't talk to him, right? That's because his meditation was on that. And he wanted to know what should he do? What should he do about that? And everyone's advice was, well, you've done it. There's nothing you can do to fix that now. So thank you. Also, not too long ago, some of you might remember the story. I think it was like in 2007. There was an astronaut who she had an affair with a married man, and then that he ended up shunning her for another girl, for another woman. And this very smart, intelligent woman, she decided to drive 900 miles across the country. She would put diapers on so she wouldn't have to stop. And she brought with her some pepper spray, a big knife, gloves, a wig, like a trench coat, all this stuff. And she went and accosted the other woman at the airport and assaulted her, sprayed her with the pepper spray. She got arrested. She lost her job, her honor, and now everybody remembers her for that, right? So right there you can see that these desires that we have, these meditations that we have, are the causes of our misery, right? And we can also see that it takes our intelligence away from us. So the Bhagavad Gita says in chapter 2, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. From anger complete delusion arises, and from delusion bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So we can definitely see that in the story of that astronaut, right? Astronauts are highly revered in our culture, and now she lost all her intelligence because of her meditation on the opposite sex. And okay, so also family is a big meditation that people have. You know, people, they put so many expectations on their family members, and when they don't meet that, they become greatly disturbed, right? And then can go so far as, you know, kids, parents are getting upset at their kids because they're not listening. Sometimes parents can start to resent their children and abuse them. And the same thing can happen with children and their parents. You know, there's so many cases of elder abuse too, because kids are resenting their parents, right? And this is because of that attachment, because that family member is no longer serving their desires, right? So how do we fix this? So the next verses in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita says, but a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through the regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. For one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. In such satisfied consciousness, one's intelligence is soon well established. So right there, the Bhagavad Gita tells us, through the regulative principles of freedom, that's how we fix this. So that's what we're following here. You know, the 4 regulative principles, those are our tool to help us keep our intelligence and our mind focused on what we should be doing. So desire is the root of misery and bondage, right? And our media, our media, all of it, it just feeds into that. It makes us, it facilitates us having more and more desires, right? So I know personally, when I use social media, all of a sudden I can notice, all of a sudden I have a stronger desire to be a good consumer, right? You know, oh, yes. Oh, I want to go, you know, go to a fancy restaurant. I want to go buy those new shoes. I want to go to that amusement park, whatever it is, right? And I can observe that feeling within myself when I spend more time on social media. And we see this also in our TV and our movies, right? That makes us desire. There's these expectations that people have for relationships, you know, are not realistic, right? And that's because in our television and our movie shows, we're seeing unrealistic representations of relationships, right? And you know, so if a girl doesn't, you know, have a guy that you know climbs to the top of a building and showers flower petals all over her, and she's like, well, what's wrong with this guy? You know, he doesn't actually love me. You know, and it goes both ways. Also, our news is really invested in keeping people dissatisfied and fighting, right? I think, let's see, Srila Prabhupada says here in the purport, if we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. So think about the news cycle particularly like as it pertains to immigration, right? There's a lot of talk about illegal immigrants and they're invading our borders. They're taking our jobs. We're Americans. Americans, we should be serving Americans. We shouldn't be serving these other people, right? We see this all the time in the news. And all that is doing is serving to get people riled up and more strongly identified with, I'm an American. You know, we have freedom here. We have freedom in this country, right? Freedom. Except for if you look at the laws of the world, there's lots of other countries that have so-called freedom, okay? And I think the last time I did research on this topic, actually New Zealand was freer than us, right? But I don't really hear New Zealand yelling, we're freedom, freedom, right? It's because we're trying to identify too strongly with our nation instead of seeing each other as spirit souls. We're seeing each other as separate. Oh, those people, we can't have those people here because they're not Americans, right? So, yes. Okay, so also, you know, I was thinking, this verse made me think about, you know, there's still tribal populations in the world that haven't been contacted by modern civilization, right? And generally, when they are contacted by modern civilization, it does not go well for that tribal population, right? They get diseases, they have interpersonal strife within the tribe, and there was a really interesting quote I found. This is from a speech made by a tribal leader named Harao, and this is his speech. This is in 1671. When the Spaniards were trying to invade and colonize. He says, the Spaniards would have done better to remain in their own country. We have no need of their help to live happily. Satisfied with what our islands furnish us, we desire nothing. The knowledge which they have given us has only increased our needs and stimulated our desires. Is it necessary that our desires make us want iron and other trifles which only render us unhappy? Right, so right there, this man, he knows that those stimulating of those desires leads to unhappiness, and that they were previously satisfied, but now they're not, and now there's so much strife within their tribe. There's other tribes that this has happened to. I mean, we've all throughout history. So, all right. So Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 says, text 36 says, Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? The Supreme Personality of God said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bhartas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So again, there, the Bhagavad Gita tells us we need to regulate our senses, right? And the previous verse that I quoted told us how we do that by following the regulative principles of freedom. Because we know if we feed those desires, they end up just growing. You think, I'm going to be satisfied. I'm going to be satisfied if I get, a new house. And so then you might be satisfied for some time, but ultimately that satisfaction wears off and you end up kind of looking for greener pastures, right? And then there's always that feeling that, the grass is always greener on the other side. Oh, I don't have that. I want what he has. And then you do some finagling, you get what he has, and now suddenly you might be satisfied for a little bit, but you no longer are. this principle can be seen in its grossest form in terms of like addiction, right? Someone takes some intoxication and they feel good for a little bit, and then it wears off and they think, well, I want to do that again. And so they do it again and they feel good for a little bit. And then again, it wears off. And so then I want to do that again. And so they do it again, only now this time, that little bit that they took doesn't work as well anymore. So now they have to take more, right? And then this process sort of speeds up and goes faster and faster. And you're having to take more and more to get the same effect. And ultimately, it just leads to dissatisfaction. And I mean, addiction's horrible. It's ravaged our entire community, like not specifically the Hare Krishna community, but just go outside and look up and down the street. I mean, there's just so much misery from addiction out there. And that's the grossest form of this. But the same thing happens with satisfying our senses really in any way, as long as we're doing it for our own enjoyment, right? So we're not the body. We don't need to be consumed with these desires. So how do we address that? How do we not be consumed with these desires? Because we can't stop desiring, right? So we try to align these desires with Krishna's desires, dovetail them with Krishna's desire. And we want to get that higher taste, right? We find that if we do this, if we do align our desires with the desires of Krishna, then we get a higher taste. So again, I'll use the example of addiction because it's something that I personally have dealt with and seen. But in the past, I really enjoyed taking intoxication, and I think, I would seek it out, and now the thought of doing that is just so ridiculous to me. I would not do that, and that's because I found something better than that. I have a much higher taste for something better, and that's being with the devotees, doing service for Krishna. Well. All right. So, in Canto 5 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead fulfills the material desires of a devotee who approaches him with such motives, with material desires. But he does not bestow benedictions upon the devotee that will cause him to demand more benedictions again. However, the Lord willingly gives the devotee shelter at his own lotus feet, even though such a person does not aspire for it. And that shelter satisfies all his desires. That is the Supreme Personality's special mercy. So that sounds pretty sweet, right? I mean, the Lord, even if you have material desires, if you approach the Lord for those, he will fulfill those desires for you, but he'll do it in such a way that eventually you will come to only desire his own lotus feet. So we're running out of time. This. Okay, so I have one example from my own life, because again, I want to say, what is your meditation? That's kind of the whole theme of my class today. Is I want you to think about, what is your meditation? What are you meditating all the time? And so, in order to kind of move those desires into a more positive way, we want to align them with the desires of Krishna. So I'll give you an example from my own life. So before I became involved in Krishna consciousness, a very big meditation of mine would be like, what am I going to wear tomorrow, right? So I would, sometimes at night, I would be thinking, oh yes, I'm going to wear this beautiful dress, and I'll do my hair just so, and I'll wear this jewelry, and I'll put this makeup on and these shoes, and that's going to look great, right? And I would spend a lot of time doing that, and it wasn't fulfilling at all, I tell you what. Because because sometimes it wouldn't turn out the way I wanted, and I would be distressed. I didn't like it. But now, I made the decision about a year ago to kind of give up that stuff and put white on and wear the same thing every day, right? And then, but I still have that propensity to want to make beautiful outfits and things like that. Only now I use that propensity to dress our deities, right? And so I'll sit and I'll meditate and think, oh, what outfit am I going to put on Gorni Tai tomorrow? And what jewelry am I going to put on them? Which hair am I going to put on them? Those things. And so I'm still using that same propensity I had to want to make a beautiful outfit, but this time I'm using it to dress our deities. And that, I'll tell you what, is far more satisfying, because I just look at, I didn't really dress anybody today, but I look at the deities and I just am speechless because it's just so beautiful. And I certainly didn't feel that way when I looked in the mirror at my outfit, at my own outfit, right? Okay, so one thing we should be aware of, though, is kind of making these trying to give up desires before we're ready, right? Before we're able. So this is a really nice part from Light of the Bhagavata. It says, many plants and creepers that were almost dead during the months of April and May are now visible again in various forms, for they are nourished by their roots in the moist earth. These numberless plants and creepers resemble persons who dry up in severe penances for some material gain, but then achieve their objectives and become luxuriously fat, nourished by sense enjoyment. So that means, they're giving up things, but not for the right reason, right? And in reality, they're just sort of biding their time until they can get that sense enjoyment again. And so that doesn't really accomplish anything. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that when the daytime of Brahma is over, the manifested creations of the universe all vanish. And after the end of Brahma's night, the creation is manifested again. Thus, the cosmic creation in its manifestation and non-manifestation resembles the creepers and plants that appear during the rainy season, and it gradually vanish when the season is over. Even when the plants and creepers are no longer to be seen, their seeds remain, and these dormant seeds fructify in contact with water. Similarly, the seed-like spiritual sparks who are dominated by the desire to lord it over material nature exist in a dormant state after the cosmic manifestation is annihilated. And when the cosmic manifestation reappears, all the silent living beings within the womb of material nature come out and engage in sense enjoyment, thereby growing luxuriously fat. To attain liberation, one must be completely purified of perverted forms of desire. A living being cannot snuff out desires, and to practice artificially erasing the actions of desires is more dangerous than the active desires themselves. All desires should be reformed and directed towards spiritual activities. Otherwise, those same desires will repeatedly manifest themselves in different varieties of material enjoyment, thus conditioning the living being perpetually in material bondage. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to tell the story of Shishupal because I feel like he was a good example of, not being able to control his desires and it not ending that well for him. Although it sort of did end well for him, but maybe not. Maybe he didn't think so immediately. But Shishupal, he was born with 3 eyes and 4 arms. He was like a prince, and so he was kind of born deformed. And there was a prophecy that said that he'll become normal if when a specific person holds him in his lap, he'll become normal. But that same person would then go on to kill him later in life. So his cousin Krishna comes to see him when he was born, or maybe he's a little bit older than that. But Krishna holds him in his lap, and suddenly his deformities disappear, and he looks like a normal baby. And his mother is so happy. She's just like, oh, thank goodness, because she's thinking about how hard it would be to have a son with those deformities. But then suddenly she remembers that prophecy. Oh no, that means his cousin Krishna is going to kill him. So she goes to Krishna and she begs him. She's like, please. She's like, just forgive him whatever offenses he makes, like 100 times, And Krishna says, okay, yeah, I'll forgive him, for 100 offenses. So a while later, Shishupal, he's friends with Rukmi, who's also a prince. And Rukmi wants him to marry his sister, Rukmini. And so the whole marriage is set up and arranged and everything. But Rukmini didn't want to marry him. And at her desire, she had written to Krishna to please come and save me from this marriage. I don't want to be married to him. I want to marry you. And so the day of the wedding celebration, Krishna comes in and he kidnaps her, which was something that was done during those times. And he kidnapped her from the wedding and they eloped. And so now Shishupal, he had a grudge against Krishna. He did not like this. He was now really having some bad feelings towards Krishna. So a while later, King Yudhishthira, he had a big Rajasuya sacrifice, and he invited esteemed guests from all over the country, including Shishupal. And he also invited Krishna as the guest of honor. So this made Shishupal pretty upset. And he started insulting Krishna. And so he insulted him and said he was just a cowherd boy, and all sorts of other insults. He's not worthy of this place of honor, and he's just continually insulting him. And Krishna was sort of silently keeping track. And when he got to the 100th insult, Krishna warned him and said, "Hey, wait a minute here." But Shishupal, he couldn't control himself, and so the 101 insult, Krishna had to keep his vow that he was going to kill him, and so he called this Sudarshan disc, and he just kind of, and he ends up beheading Shishupal. And there's actually a really wonderful painting. I mean, some people might think it's gruesome, I don't know, but I really like this painting. And you can find it in that Avatar art book. I really like it, of this scene. So the part that ended up being that ended up being good for Shishupal is that Shishupal is then liberated. He achieved moksha, and he merged into Krishna's body. So Shishupal was not able to control himself, right? Even though he knew that if he kept going, he was going to be killed. But he did it anyway because he wasn't able to control himself, because his intelligence was lost, right? Because he's trying to satisfy his senses. He was so infuriated because he didn't get what he wanted, which was Rukmini, right? And this, for years, he's meditating on this, his anger. And so that, I just want to say one more time to remind you all, what is your meditation? Just think about that. What am I meditating on every day? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it women or men? Is it Krishna? Let's try to make it Krishna. So with that, we'll end here, and we can open for any questions or comments. And if anybody has an example of kind of letting your desires get away from you, and you can give that an example, or if you have any comments or questions. Yeah. Anybody? Oh yes, Chandrika.
Let's talk about, what are we meditating on, and also, lust and bewilderment. So we tend to, hold things in our minds from the material world that happen. So yesterday I was in the store and there was a song, and it says, "I still haven't found what I'm looking for." I know you know that song. So,
Yeah.
And these songs, so you can't get away from it because these songs are here, and there's so many like that. I was thinking, I'm going to change the song as it was playing. I have found what I've been looking for, Krishna.
Yeah.
And so that's like, that becomes that meditation instead of falling into the trap of the whole song and what it does to our emotions because it's a past thing and like that. So I just wanted to share that.
I find sometimes like I might be in a situation I'm not entirely pleased with what's happening in the situation, but I'm tolerating it. I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll tolerate this. But then someone else will come along and be like, hey, this is really bad situation, or this sucks. And then all of a sudden now I'm more agitated by it, and I'm just like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Yeah, we should do something. Whereas previous to that, I was, not being constantly reminded that I still haven't found what I'm looking for, I was able to tolerate the situation.
But she felt shy about that too, because she's shy. But Krishna knew, because he's in her heart, he's in everybody's heart. He knew she wanted to marry him. So then she gave him a real great reason to write him, because she was going to be kidnapped. So it's like, okay, save me. He didn't actually say, I want to. Did she say, I want to marry her in the letter?
I actually don't think she did.
I don't think she did, but it gave her, right. That's the whole point, that it gave her a excuse to write him, and then Krishna could play the chivalrous guy, and then Krishna just took her off. He kidnapped her and married her. So Krishna's great.
Nice.
Also, I remember when I remember indexing this verse in the 70s. Fourth canto was a reprint, and we were doing reprints, and I was the indexer in LA. And this verse really struck me, especially when Prabhupada says, when the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness. So there I am, a young guy, trying to be a brahmachari, an American brahmachari, right? And, but conflicted like this. So it really hit me. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness, by continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. And then, oh yeah, that's right. So it really whoa, okay, this is heavy stuff. This is Sanat Kumar, preaching to Maharaj Prithu. But when I read this verse, I thought, wow, this is the verse from the 70s that really, struck me.
And that's why we have to just depend on the mercy of Guru and Krishna, right? So, all right. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.